law degree is very flexible.
It is.
Are you, do you like working for First Counsels?
Yeah, but he's a good guy.
It's
It seems
He's
like
very
it.
it's
focused,
a lot more relaxing in one
which is
regard, and that
both
is
good and maddening in
silly
different
meetings go
ways.
day in and day out.
The way that they've done the aisle on this
Boss, you don't have that.
room
I don't have any administrative responsibility. All I have to do is go out there and
is where the door is.
see what I can turn up.
Carl moved to California. So you knew Shelley before you guys started working together?
Yes, my brother was married to Shelley's daughter.
That's a great place to live.
Yeah, so I knew Shelley from, and my brother's a little bit older than me, so I knew Shelley since I was a little kid. And then when I went to Georgetown, he went. They moved out of the area, so I, didn't have them in DC.
Actually conditioned the license on getting it, but it will take several years for
Right.
them to get
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
But they can't make, I became satisfied that their financial model was predicated on their getting ABA accredited, because nobody will come there if they can't take the
Yeah.
bar exam, and they can't take the bar exam unless they're accredited, so
Yeah.
I ended up.
Just saying.
Yeah.
Not that I know of. Thanks.
Lawyer's office compared in relation to here.
The general counsel's office, they're actually on the other side. They're part of the hospital complex. So they're right off it.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ricky Barron, and I'm a member of the Duke Education Law and Policy Society. The Education Law and Policy Society is an interdisciplinary organization of students and faculty from Duke Law School and the Terry Sanford Institute of Public Policy. The society promotes research, debate, and professional development in the area of education law and policy by sponsoring symposia and lectures like this one. We are excited to present today this panel discussion entitled Hot Topics and Careers in Higher Education, which will focus on some of the current issues facing higher education, both legal and otherwise, as well as explore career paths in higher education. Before we begin, I'd like to thank our sponsor, Lohnes, who had graciously provided us with two wonderful attorneys, as well as covered the expenses for the event. We'd also like to thank Tia Barnes from Career Services for helping us plan the event. I'd now like to introduce the moderator of our discussion today, Christopher Murray, an associate in Lohnes' post-secondary education group. Mr. Murray joined Lohnes in 2005, and his practice focuses on the higher education industry. He routinely addresses the complex federal and state regulatory issues, including accreditation that confront Lohnes' post-secondary clients. In addition, Mr. Murray has completed regulatory due diligence for several transactions involving the sale of post-secondary institutions and has analyzed the impact of transnational regulations on post-secondary education. Mr. Murray received his JD from Vanderbilt University Law School, where he was editor of the Vanderbilt Law Review. Following his first year of law school, Mr. Murray was a law clerk at the National Association of College and University Attorneys. Without further ado, Mr. Christopher Murray. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. One of the things I liked most when I was a student attending events like this was to hear how the speakers got from graduation day in college to their current position. With as much brevity as possible, Shelley, that means you, please describe the background of your career and how you got to where you currently are in higher education.
Go
Go ahead.
Good afternoon. My name is Chris Simmons, and I work here at Duke. I'm in charge of federal relations for the university. And when I graduated from college, I told my dad that I would never go into higher education. I'm third generation higher education administrator, and there's 14 members of my family that have worked at a college or university at one point or another. Said I'd never go into higher ed. I waited tables for a couple of months, and then I started working as an admission officer at a small college in Oregon. Loved admission work, loved financial aid, and decided to go to graduate school and study higher education policy. I did that with the intent that I would go back to a college or university somewhere and work in admission financial aid. And while I was in graduate school, discovered that there's this wonderful nexus between higher education and politics. And as luck would have it, I fell in love with a woman who lived in Washington, D.C., so I moved there. And I spent 10 years there working first on the Hill on some higher education issues. And then I worked for two nonprofit presidential associations in Washington, one the Association of American Universities, which is the major research universities in the country. And then I worked at the American Council on Education. The last 4 years I was there as one of their lobbyists. My wife and I have two small kids, and we decided that we wanted to get out of Washington. And the stars lined up, and Duke had a job opening. And so I came here a year ago now, and I've been here for a year.
And he has a much straighter path than I do. Can you hear me? Is this on?
I think it is.
Okay.
Okay, Doctor? Yeah.
When I graduated from Brown, there were almost no women lawyers anywhere at the time, and I was not really sure what I wanted to do. So I got a job as the receptionist at the ACLU office in Atlanta, and it became very clear to me that I would be more useful and happier if I were the lawyer instead of if I were the receptionist. So I went to Northeastern Law School and graduated and got a job working for Judge McMillan, who was the federal district judge in Charlotte at the time, and stayed in Charlotte and worked for legal services for 4 years, and then got a job at what was then Chambers Stein, is now Ferguson Stein, doing plaintiff civil rights work. So I did plaintiff civil rights litigation for about 12 years and got exhausted, mostly in eastern North Carolina, but really kind of all over North Carolina. And so I ran for the state Senate. And when I got elected to the state Senate, just sort of by somewhat of a quirk, I ended up very quickly being the chairman of the Senate Education and Higher Education Appropriations Committee and the Senate Education and Higher Education Committee. So that was my first link to education, although I had actually represented some teachers and whatnot in my law practice. By the time I left the Senate 6 years later, I was pretty well immersed in education and higher education, and went to work as the general counsel for the Charlotte-Mecklenburg schools. And I did that for 3 years and then became the general counsel for UNC. So it's a very crooked path, but it's okay in life to have crooked paths.
I think what you'll hear from all of us, you've already heard several stories, is that in spite of your desires to have great planning and certitude in your life, it ain't going to happen. I graduated from Johns Hopkins, went immediately on to Columbia Law School, and it was 1966, and there was a small fracas going on in Southeast Asia that you may have read about and seen movies, and there was something else that affected everyone's life at the time, and there's something called the draft. So the option, which I would have loved to have exercised between college and law school, of going and studying in Australia, where I wanted to go, was not an open option. And I was faced being 25 and graduating from law school. So I went to see my draft board. Had a whole lot of options. And the lady who controlled everyone's life in District 21 in New York said, well, go to school, Sonny, it'll be okay. So I went out and got a master's in public administration at the University of Minnesota, turned 26, and at the time, most of you don't know about the rules, you would not be called up. You were eligible till age 39, but you would not be called up until whatever enemy was landing at Ocean City. So I got married. We two Manhattanites left for Minneapolis, Minnesota. We had a wonderful year. I was along pursuing my master's in public administration. A pivotal thing occurred. I was offered an assistantship as dean to the dean of the extension division at the university. Really got to like the whole concept of being in a university. But the year was over. I was figuring out what to do. I was nailing down my degree, and all the folks were back east. They were older. We figured, let's head east, and I took a job with a firm in Baltimore, basically because I'd gone to Hopkins and I liked Baltimore. After 2 years, I rapidly discovered this was not for me. As an aside, I can't tell you over the course of the years how many third years have called me and said, get me out, how do I get to do what you do? But certainly what I experienced, what I learned in those 2 years served me very well for the rest of my professional career. So I started looking around to get into university administration somehow. And I went to see the head of the poli-sci department at Hopkins. I called some other people I knew, and I said, what do you know? And one day, I got a call from a group I never heard of saying, would you like to work in governmental relations for the American Council on Education? I had no idea what AC was all about. Never thought about government relations, although I was always fascinated by about what lobbyists do. In an era that you all will never see again in your lifetime, I was interviewed on a Friday and offered a job on a Wednesday with an 80% increase in salary. By the way, my starting salary in 1967 at Gordon Feinblatt, which is now a 95-person law firm, was $7,600. And we live well.
Do you make more than that now?
I haven't seen this week's paycheck. Ultimately, what happened, I wound up going to AC in August of 1969, and I stayed there for 37 years. The work was challenging, intriguing, and really rewarding, certainly through all of the 70s and through much of the 80s. It was the first real involvement of the federal government with colleges and universities. The government, for the most part, didn't know what they were doing, overstepped. The colleges, as they always are, were nervous and concerned about how these things would impact on the institutions. So I retired this past September, and in October I joined the education practice at Lohnes and started a new life. So that's my career.
I'm Ralph McCaughan, Associate Counsel at Duke, and Shelley's always bragged about money like that. I started the same year in '66, and I only got $7,200, so you're way ahead of me. I practiced law. I went to Duke Law School, and before that I'd graduated from Duke undergraduate and gone in the Navy for a couple of years, so I escaped the draft, although I could have been called up, I guess. And then practiced law in a civil firm in Fort Lauderdale for 15 years. And I knew a couple of folks at Duke and in the administration, and they had a place for me, and I thought, liked to live in Durham, and was getting awful crowded in South Florida, and had young kids, wanted to raise a family up here, and they were just starting to keep time records in law firms at that time, and worrying about billable hours, and I thought, man, this sounds good. And so I came here in 1981 and been here ever since, and it's a great career. I think, as Shelley indicated, the experience I had in private practice, though, was invaluable as an attorney here at the university.
Great, thank you all. There's been a lot of talk of late in Washington regarding the NCAA and antitrust, particularly around the election last November. I know Shelley did some work with this. Kindly describe, this is a question open to the panel though, kindly describe the issue in its current incarnation and whether you think it will go anywhere.
Well, there are a couple of NCAA issues. I mean, I think when one thinks about Duke, just for example, it's not just an educational institution. It is a huge business. There are only two federal agencies that do not have jurisdiction. The Consumer Product Safety Commission, which by statute has no jurisdiction, though they try to get it, and the Federal Trade Commission, which sometimes tries to stick amendments into 900-page bills, getting jurisdiction over nonprofits. So the antitrust laws do have an implication. For the NCAA in particular, there are several issues pending. One is the desire of many people, fans alike, to try and curtail the perceived runaway aspects of coaches' salaries. And the idea's been floated to let's have an antitrust exemption very much like baseball received in 1918. And therefore, we would be able to curtail those salaries. The likelihood of that passing Congress is between remote and nil. The idea is interesting, but it doesn't have any momentum. A case to watch on the side, though, is a suit pending out in California, brought by Division I football and basketball players, saying that the limitation of an athletic scholarship to room, board, and tuition is a violation of the antitrust laws, and that they ought to be able to get the full cost of instruction, which would wind up giving many of them a bonus of $4,000 to $6,000. That case is going to be going to trial probably later this year, but it's an interesting one to keep an eye on. You've seen these allegations generally in the press that somehow college athletes are not being paid enough. This is a very legitimate lawsuit in the hands of a prominent plaintiff's firm. So this is not something just to be ignored. More than what you wanted to know about the NCAA and antitrust.
Anybody else?
I look, from my job, I look at it less from a legal perspective and more from a political perspective. And I was on the Hill last fall when there was a lot of this discussion, and I had a staff person on the Judiciary Committee say to me, 2 words of why this won't happen: football, Texas. And he said, as long as those 2 things exist and cooperate well, nothing's gonna, the NCAA is safe on this front, and intercollegiate athletics.
All right, another topic. One of the more complex issues for someone who does not work in higher education to understand is technology transfer. I would appreciate it if one of you could provide a quick and dirty summary of what technology transfer is, and what are the current issues in technology transfer.
I'll take a stab at it. Tech transfer is simply the transfer by various means of inventions and intellectual property developed at an institution like Duke or any higher education institution to a for-profit company, usually, for them to develop a product around this technology. So, I mean, the easiest example is a patented drug or compound that goes to Merck and Company or GlaxoSmithKline, and they develop a drug from that compound that was discovered and patented by a university. And this is usually done by licensing. And I think Duke is typical of institutions of higher education in that they have a licensing office and which handles the tech transfer. Duke's office combines research and licensing. Research is the money coming in to sponsor the research, and then licensing is hopefully the valuable inventions being licensed out to companies that will commercially exploit that invention. In return, the institution will receive from that licensing agreement it could be a number of items of consideration. Usually it's an upfront license fee, payment of patent costs, continuing payment of prosecution costs for the patent, and then running royalties downstream. Sometimes if it's particularly a smaller licensee, it might be in the form of stock in the company. A lot of small companies, startups, don't have any cash to give you in the way of upfront fees, and so they'll give you stock instead. So there are all sorts of different arrangements, but they end up hopefully benefiting the institution, and the inventors at every institution that I'm aware of agree when they take a job as a professor to assign all rights to the inventions over to the institution. In return, the institution agrees to give them a certain share of the net income. At Duke, it's averages out. It's a sliding scale, but averages out to about 40% of the net.
So in addition to all of these intellectual property issues that come with tech transfer, in the instances where you're licensing out to an existing third-party company that can just pay you for the license, it's pretty clean and easy. But when you're licensing to a startup company that's giving you equity, and particularly a startup company that your faculty member is creating and is going to give you equity, in addition to the intellectual property issues, there are a number of important and difficult conflict of interests and ethical issues that you have to resolve that stem out of the university now owning equity in a company that their faculty member is the primary owner of. So the university may have conflicting interests in dealing with maximizing their equity. The university's interest in the equity may not be the same as the faculty member's interest. But also, you have to very carefully monitor the faculty members' activities to make sure that the university's resources aren't going actually to support the company as opposed to supporting the academic enterprise. So on the one hand, you have these intellectual property and licensing kind of questions, but they're very important conflicts of interest questions that come along with that.
Chris, let me just chip in on just some historical aspect. The whole concept of technology transfer is relatively recent. Legislation was passed in 1980. You'll hear it referred to as the Bayh-Dole Act, and which permitted universities to have an exclusive license in embryonic patents that emerged from government-financed research. Prior to that, the federal government was sitting circa 78, 79 on 69,000 patents, and nobody would use those patents because they would not be able to acquire exclusive rights. Now, institutions are able to grant those rights, and a very expansive and societally beneficial aspect has come about through the institutions marketing these embryonic patents, granting an exclusive license, say to a biotech, and getting that to market. The discovery of patentable processes are all serendipity on campus. It's not predictable, but when they do come up with something and have the ability to get a corporation to take it to market, society as a whole really benefits. It gets lost sometimes in the discussion of how much money is School X making over that, and the points that Leslie raised are extremely important and more complex with every passing day in terms of conflict of interest.
There's also, if you're interested in this, there's an article in today's Chronicle of Higher Education on this topic.
Great. During the course of my education, from high school to college to law school, there was an exponential growth in the use of technology in education. When I was in high school, few of us had access to email, but when I was in law school, there was a wireless network and everyone took notes by computer. But But the role of technology in education is a complicated one, particularly when it comes to online learning. The for-profit institutions have led the charge into online learning. Will the traditional nonprofits follow? If so, what will the impact be on institutions like Duke and Carolina? What do you see as the future of online learning at traditional institutions?
I can tell you that UNC is about to make a major push into online learning, and we're doing it really for two reasons. We now think that we're going to grow by 80,000 students in the next 10 years. And so part of our push into online learning is just how in the heck are we going to provide education to all these people? And it's clear we're not going to build enough buildings to do that. So, and as we have more and more adult learners in North Carolina that need to have access to education that may not live in a place that has a university, online learning is a critical piece of access. But honestly, the other reason we're doing it is because we think we can make money doing it, and that it can be a revenue stream for us that we can plow into the educational enterprise, particularly if we market the online learning in other countries. So there are lots and lots of legal issues as well as academic issues that come along with this. You've got to, first of all, assure the very baseline thing is to assure that your academic standards get maintained. But beyond academic standards, you have ADA issues, there are intellectual property issues in both directions. Faculty members tend to steal other people's intellectual property to put it online. And then you also need to make sure that what you plow into developing these online courses doesn't get taken by other people. So there are lots of legal issues that come along with it, and I think lots of really important academic and instructional issues as well. What's Duke doing?
I'm not aware of, Chris, that Duke is undertaking any such an effort for online education. We try to maximize use of computers, as you know better than I do. But as far as actually online learning, I know the business school has a worldwide MBA program, global executive MBA, but I think, and that uses computers, but they also require a certain degree of in-person learning at that. Are you aware of anything else?
No, I was just going to say, part of Chris's question was the implications for a place like Duke because of this. And my guess would be that the implications are probably minimal for a place like Duke in the sense that the types of students who would take advantage of a program that UNC might be developing of online education wouldn't necessarily be the type of student who would enroll here as an undergraduate or even a graduate student because they're looking for a different type of experience, the interaction. But for someone who lives in High Point and wants to pursue that graduate degree or an undergraduate degree and doesn't have the ability to move because of other obligations, something like that would be an outstanding opportunity for them, especially if UNC, the quality of UNC was behind it.
Well, and of course, one of the challenges is to keep this kind of intangible benefits of education and interaction and teamwork and collaboration and communication and all those other things that you are supposed to learn in education. You've got to get it there. But I know some very respected academics that think that the underlying academic quality will be easier to maintain at a high level through, because there's generally much more rigorous review of the course content than, and the course content is generally developed collaboratively. So in some ways, it's easier to monitor than just sending out, hundreds of individual faculty members to classrooms and telling them to go develop a good syllabus.
Well, just as a public policy aside, are we, what you just heard, doesn't require a response, starting to see another economic divide, another social divide in American society between the haves and have-nots? and as states, and I'm not being critical of UNC in any way, shape, or form, look at burgeoning populations that need to be served, distance learning is one of the easiest ways of fulfilling their obligations as an instrumentality of the state. Just want to put that on your plate for discussion.
That is a wonderful segue to my next question. Thank you, Shelley. There was a recent set of articles in the Wall Street Journal by Charles Murray, no relation to me, regarding higher education. And in one of his articles entitled, "What's Wrong with Vocational Education?" he postulated that based on IQ tests, we are sending too many students to four-year colleges. For example, he guessed that an IQ of, say, 115 to 125 was needed to really succeed in college. And while only a small percentage of the population has an IQ in that range, we're sending 45% of the population to university. I do not know anything about the scientific authenticity of his ideas. But his thesis was that we need to send more people to vocational school because we've created an excess of white-collar services, doctors, lawyers, and bankers, with the subsequent dearth of blue-collar services, mechanics, plumbers, and landscapers. What is wrong with vocational education? Are we sending too many students to traditional universities? Is there a huge difference in the quality of education between vocational education and liberal arts education?
I know it's hard to get a good plumber.
All right, I'll play.
Do we have an hour or two to discuss this?
Well, having sort of watched developments in post-secondary education for 37 years, I've always been distressed by the fact that there is a seeming underutilization of the capacity of the community college system, and that much of what many young people need could be fulfilled through their local community college. And one could say, well, then are you creating some secondary class, invoking some kind of litmus test of a British variety? And the answer is no, when one realizes that you do have lifelong learning available, and not all of it online. So that there has become an increased societal impact on parents and students saying, if you don't go to a four-year college, somewhere along the line you're a failure. I don't know how that jives with all the young men and women who take advantage of two-year institutions and find themselves with a career not heavily in debt or in debt at all, and earning money and contemplating what they really want to do and study further later on in their lives. I think in part the media is responsible, as we have the annual rush of stories on acceptances and focus on elite schools. It does permeate the scene. There is a trickle down of that even to lower middle income and hard-strapped families somehow saying, we ought to do this for our kids. Don't have an answer.
This is a question that we struggle with every single day of the week. We have a whole commission that's just getting going called, we keep on changing the name of it, I think it's now called UNC Tomorrow, that's supposed to be dealing with the question of how much higher education, of what types needs to be available in the state to basically reinvent and sustain the state's economy, as well as to enable us to have civil and civically healthy and sustainable communities. And it's an enormously complicated question. The relationship between the community colleges and the university is very complicated. I don't know if any of you listened to Governor Easley's State of the State address Monday night, probably not too many of you, but he said that he thought every high school graduate in North Carolina should go to college. And I thought that personally that was preposterous, but he's the governor and I'm not. But if you, it is clearly true that the percentage of jobs that are decent jobs that you can support a family that you can get without a college education is decreasing markedly. It has decreased dramatically. And so the trick then is to figure out what kinds of skills you really need to be teaching people and at what level, and also how you move more people into these institutions of getting these skills without actually devaluing the quality of the education or diminishing the quality of the education that you're giving there. And all that relates back to also what kind of job high schools are doing in getting people prepared to do college level work. So I think you have to have a whole seminar on this. I don't think we can do this one in 10 minutes.
When are we coming back?
Moving on to a completely different topic. The Bush administration and Secretary Spellings, the education secretary, are big fans of collecting numbers, as best evidenced by No Child Left Behind. While the value of collecting numbers is debatable on all levels of education, the higher education community right now is in the midst of a debate concerning outcomes reporting. Please explain what outcomes reporting is and why it's so controversial. If outcomes reporting works for vocational schools, why can't it work for traditional nonprofits? And I'll ask Chris to start off because he works in federal relations for Duke.
There are so many levels to this discussion. There are so many, it goes back to issues related to cost. It goes back to issues related to elementary, secondary education in the United States. And it goes to recent reports that show perhaps the United States isn't keeping up with pace internationally on producing certain graduates in certain areas and whether or not we're doing a good job or not. The outcomes debate basically is, how do we know that when a student enters Duke as an undergrad or enters University of North Carolina at Wilmington, enters Pasadena Community College, that they learned something? And how do you measure that? And most institutions have internal mechanisms which show measurement. One of the things that Secretary Spellings is very interested in is showing improvement over time. My guess would be that a test that's given to a freshman at Duke on general knowledge of the world, that the difference between when they entered and when they graduated would probably be pretty small, because most of the students that enter Duke as freshmen are pretty smart. It may be more different at other institutions, but what it really comes down to, and Duke's perspective on it, is that the role of the federal government and institutions of higher education, that relationship has worked remarkably well. And if any of you have heard President Broadhead speak or read any of his writings on this issue, he really believes in the fact that as we are striving to create ourselves, to force our institutions to be more like Asian institutions and more focused and more driven on outcomes, they at the same time are trying to make their institutions more like us, more autonomous from the government, more opportunities for choice. So we really believe that the relationship between the federal government and institutions should be pretty limited, and that there are some things that we need to take care of on our own, and one of those is producing good graduates. And most institutions feel like they're doing a good job. When you go into these conversations one-on-one with members of the Department of Ed, members of Congress, they'll say, well, this isn't really aimed at a place like Duke. But when you introduce these broad regulatory swaths, it affects everyone who's eligible for Title IV funding, which provides us Pell Grants and loans.
Marty, you've got an institution. I've got nothing.
All right, I will say, it's very different if you're sitting in a public institution than if you're
Right.
sitting in a private institution.
Here, here.
And it's very clear that if you're spending literally billions of dollars of the taxpayers' money, that the taxpayers have some right to some measure that you're spending their money well. And the trick is to figure out what to measure, because one of the things we've learned painfully from our K-12 efforts and accountability is what you measure is what gets done. And that if you set the wrong measures, you really can change people's behavior in a way that can be very negative. So college education, university education is very difficult to measure because the skills that you're trying to teach are not really susceptible to a multiple choice test. And there's a huge amount of variety in what you're trying to teach. And so there is the tension. There's a real legitimate need for accountability and a real difficulty in coming up with measures that give you confidence that you won't end up interfering with the good things that are going on in university classrooms. So we are actually working on these 20 accountability measures that UNC is going to put forward to the public, and they're very varied. Some of them are easy, have to do with resource utilization, what percentage of the time we use our classrooms and that sort of thing. That's the easy part. The hard part is trying to get a measure of whether we're actually teaching anybody anything that's useful. And that's really hard, and we'll debate it for a long time before we actually settle on it. But one of the reasons we're also doing it is that we hope that if we do it voluntarily, it will prevent either the state legislature or Congress from doing it to us. You have anything to add?
No, I think that's
a very
remarkably
different
good.
thing.
I mean, it is as complicated as can be. The secretary has a favorite phrase she uses with her senior staff and says, "In God we trust, all others must bring data." This is a lot of the philosophy, as Chris was saying, really evolves out of No Child Left Behind. I don't understand anything about the issue except as a parent, a citizen. What are you measuring? What are you going to measure? I've seen some rather disturbing aspects. Some of the data, for example, that was revealed during the University of Michigan affirmative action case, both at the undergraduate and law school level. If you go back and read some of the amicus briefs and the briefs in chief, it presents a pretty disturbing reports on what are we teaching young men and women while we have them as undergraduates at our institution. Why are they not performing better on the LSATs or the MCATs or the GREs? Is that going to be our standard? I mean, do you suddenly administer the GREs to all your entire freshman class, you put it aside, and then you take it 4 years later and see whether you've learned anything? I'm not quite sure that particularly is a good way of proceeding, but the questions posed are difficult ones, and Leslie and Chris articulated a whole lot of reasons why it has popular political appeal, but realistically, I think it is unattainable. But you got to go do something.
Maybe unattainable, but we're going to do it anyhow.
You got to do it anyway. Can't wait. Stay tuned.
The American Bar Association had a recent standoff with the Department of Education regarding the ABA's position on diversity. The particular issue with the ABA and the department was the conflict between the ABA standards, the Supreme Court's holding in the Michigan cases, and state laws and constitutional amendments, which now stand at 4, I believe. For Duke and UNC, what is the state of diversity in North Carolina? And has the ABA diversity controversy had any impact on your law schools?
Well, Duke, in financial aid, you kind of divide this into admissions and financial aid. In financial aid, we follow the Office of Civil Rights guidelines, and it's our policy to comply with the law and follow the cases, the Michigan cases, as they have fallen down. And they're not always crystal clear if you've read them, but as far as the results, I don't know what our diversity stands at now at Duke. Is it 15%?
As an institution,
Yes.
I think we're close to 40% of our undergraduates.
40 an undergraduate?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
And
Chris, what's included in that 40%?
everything you'd expect to be included in the 40%.
Non-Caucasians, I guess.
Non-Caucasian, yeah.
Yeah.
But the Kofi institutions, which are the most elite private institutions, Duke is the most diverse out of the Kofi institutions. And we, this year in undergraduate admission, I understand we have the most diverse applicant pool we've ever had. And I don't know about law school.
Okay, I'll move on to something else.
Stay out.
Shelley's given many incarnations of his sex, drugs, and rock and roll speech over the years, which I believe everyone on this panel has heard at least once. At the heart of many student life issues is in loco parentis, or the role of the university in place of one's parents. Recent issues involve suicide at MIT, depression at GW, and anorexia at SUNY Cortland. If the panel could please extrapolate on the current topics in loco parentis, and please describe how institutions have chosen to deal with the in loco parentis issue.
All right. Let you guys talk about what's happening
Well,
on campus now.
I think every institution's different in this respect. The Duke, because it has dormitory space for a majority of its undergraduates, they have off-campus housing, despite what we all know about the lacrosse situation. Off-campus housing is probably minimal compared to a lot of institutions. And I would say that the trend at Duke over the last, say, 15, 20 years has been more back towards in loco parentis, as opposed to, it started in the 60s, moving away. It was very strong when I was an undergraduate here, and then moved away from it in the 70s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, and then it's moving back now. And we're making an effort to try to find a balance. We have a requirement that some students have to live off campus because we just don't have enough dorm space to say you must live on campus. At the same time, we have an area around East Campus where the lacrosse house was, and you're familiar with this as much as I am. And in that area, there were a number of houses that zoning laws were perhaps, not being followed. I'm not privy to all the details of that, but that's what the press says. And so Duke bought up a number of homes over there, I think half a dozen or 8 of them.
13.
13 homes in the area around East Campus in Trinity Park, with the idea that at least close to campus in this neighborhood, Duke would buy, sell them to people who would renovate them, and they'd become single-family homes again. And we managed to buy the lacrosse house just before that happened, and so it was listed in our name, which is maybe not a great timing on that. But so at any rate, and in that regard, we are moving, I think, back towards in loco parentis. Now, as far as security goes, we have a security force that's in the nature of security guards, and we also have a police force, a Duke Campus Police, which are commissioned as police officers and authorized to, with power of arrest and so forth. And in fact, under the state law, this is permitted, and we have in fact signed a memorandum of understanding with the local, the city police, and we have extended the jurisdiction of our police to act in the area around East Campus. So, we have extended out, at least our security force, to provide a degree of protection for our students. And anything else to add, Chris?
We're a little, we're very different on this question, but I think that it's more interesting to talk a little bit about the tension that we are now feeling about our obligation to provide a safe campus for our students and employees. Some of you may remember that almost 3 years ago now, in quick succession, 2 women students were murdered by other students at by male students at UNC Wilmington. And that threw us into a serious introspection about what our campuses can and should be doing to assure campus safety. And it's very difficult because, in fact, our campuses are much more safe than the society at large is. We have about, I think, 1/6 or it's a very small percentage of the crime on campus that if you weren't on a campus in North Carolina. But there's a real tension between what we perceive to be the culture of openness in necessary for a university, and our primary mission of providing access as a public institution with this need to try to protect people and keep them safe. So as we got a lot of pressure to do criminal background checks on every person that we were admitting into UNC, which we thought might just kind of bring us to our knees administratively anyhow, there was a real tension between, are we going to do criminal background checks on everybody and keep out a bunch of people who need education, who weren't going to hurt anybody anyhow, in the name of finding the 1 or 2 bad apples that may have committed a crime before and then would come on campus and commit another crime. So we ended up deciding not to do that, but we did put in a number of safety-oriented screenings in our admissions process, and our admissions process is much tighter than it was before. But hopefully, it's very unsettling because you really don't want to keep out people that need education and shouldn't be kept out. And the more regulatory you are on people after they get there, the more you are infringing with their individual freedom. So that is a tension as well that we struggle with in this area.
In a broader, one of the benefits of having been at the American Council on Education for 37 years is I didn't have faculty, I didn't have students, and I didn't have a football team, all of which made my life much, much better. I could sit and pontificate about things I actually knew nothing about. In loco parentis turned out to be something I watched over a period of time because it started to develop, as Ralph said, in the 60s, and my first brush with all this was with the student activism and the anti-war movement in the late 60s and early 70s. What has happened recently? And actually, there's a good article, I think, in the Alumni Journal, Duke Alumni Journal this month. The tension is between the university trying to provide a measure of security and to allow students, as Leslie mentioned, to have sufficient latitude to exercise judgment and perhaps even make some mistakes, is now in blatant conflict with helicopter parents who have now totally descended on the institution, worrying about everything from Johnny and Susie's grades to why you didn't know that Susie was not in her bed and was sleeping with her boyfriend last weekend. I mean, you talk to deans of students throughout the country, you get the most amazing stories of what they have to deal with in terms of parents. My parents, none of the parents of any of us sitting here, wouldn't have dared or even thought of calling the institution on these minor matters. So there's that conflict. As the schools want to grant sufficient freedom, you find parents saying, well, hold a second, we want you to go even beyond what you were doing in the old days. So that's one aspect. The other, and Leslie alluded to it, and that is unless you have student buy-in. I mean, we could have a totally safe campus, although as I walked and drove around the Duke campus today, I would give up. But let's postulate for a second we could have one, but it would look like a concentration camp. And when schools have gone to excess, out of good faith and good effort, but unilaterally imposed security measures, the students have just systematically dismantled. So there's the other side of that tension. But it will continue, and liability issues prop up from time to time. Something just as lawyers to think about. You'll see cases lost by institutions, this is worthwhile noting, at the trial level, because generally there is a very sympathetic victim and a deep-pocketed university, so you tend to lose at the trial level. In almost every case, if it has gone all the way up in the appellate system, you'll find that the institution has done everything it could. You'll also find a whole lot of institutions settling cases, and you all understand why you do that. The cost of litigation being as high, and sometimes the adverse publicity, it's not worth keeping it in the press. Just settle it, get it out of the press, and move on, no matter what the cost.
Just as lawyers, also, another little tension for us that is very real is between the requirements of the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, and what we feel like we should or can do when there are students who may be mentally ill, who we think have the potential to be dangerous, but have not done anything wrong yet. And that is a very fine line to walk.
I believe we're almost at the end of time, but I'm sure everyone on the panel will be willing to answer as many questions as people
Gotta
have.
have some.
Go ahead.
Aside from where do I send my resume?
You discussed IP transfer earlier, and one of the, I guess, important things to a research university would be the free flow and exchange of ideas. Mm-hmm. How does that then come into tension with private partnerships and the exclusive contracts that you have not to release that information? Doesn't that tend to conflict with the goal of higher education in itself?
Well, first, let's start at the beginning of the process when somebody sponsors research. Now, if it's the NIH sponsoring research, the government doesn't try to even impose any restrictions on the freedom exchange of ideas and the publication of research results, so forth. When you have a company, let's say Merck, a drug company, comes in and sponsors research, they're a mature company and they've dealt with universities, and so they expect that the university will, in its research agreement with them, require that there be publication, freedom to publish without any fetters by the university, so that there's no chance that the research will be hidden or shelved by the company. And whether the results, let's say a clinical trial of a drug, which is clinical research, if the results are bad, we're going to publish. We're going to publish regardless. And we also, when we license, at the other end, when we're licensing valuable technology, let's assume it's valuable, to a company like Merck, we will retain the right to continue research and use it for our educational and healthcare purposes. So we put in our contractual relationships the protections that we require as an academic institution.
We also have a policy that prohibits our entering into research agreements that restrict publication. And we're very protective of that. On the other end of it, we're also working on trying to establish an institute for open source kinds of software and other technology developments to try to further the openness of some of these technological developments.
There's a degree of the exclusive nature of most licenses is required by the marketplace for that for-profit company to have a successful product. It requires exclusivity. But for academic purposes, if we restrict the terms of confidentiality agreements to 3 years, if we have the right to publish and the right to use it in education and further research in healthcare and so forth, if we retain these rights in the contract, we are satisfied that we have not impaired our academic mission.
Well, it looks like we are out of time, but if you don't have class and you want to discuss these issues more, please feel free to come forward. And I hope everyone has a great day, and I really appreciate everyone for coming. Thank you.